Negro Tales, Regnan's Anniversary. I'll be up before day tomorrow morning, Regnan. I'll sleep an hour longer, Kitty. That may bring bad luck, Regnan. Remember Nordad the tinker? He mended a pot and married a woman the same hour. That was well enough. He always had a bit of bacon for the pot and a faithful wife. What of his bad luck, Kitty? He fell asleep on the day of his anniversary, was kidnapped, gagged, and locked up in his garret. On payment of a neat little sum, his wife was informed where he was just in time for the ceremony. Anything may befall me, Kitty, just so we stand before the preacher again tomorrow night. Thus spoke Regnan and Kitty, his wife, the night before their 25th anniversary. Kitty arose early the next morning, fed Posy, the mare, chatted with a neighbor, and returned to find Regnan still snoring. "Regnan," she cried, "will you remember Nordad the tinker?" "Kitty," rejoined Regnan, "will you always remember to bring bad news? Out with you, Regnan. Be lovely today, Kitty. The bottom of your foot is clean. That tickles, Kitty. Your big toe is a good doorknob. Oh, Kitty, out, Regnan. 'Tis better to stand on 2 feet than to lose one big toe. I love you, Kitty. The way you stand such treatment shows it. A true lover is the old man who enjoys the whims of an old wife. You are a young wife today. A good breakfast, a hard day's work, and the ceremony tonight. I'll warrant that you'll outshine the preacher, Regnan." Regnan and Kitty were good religious people. They took pride in the fact that they divided their religious duties. He prayed night and morning. She said the blessing at all times. She gathered the moral and religious news of the neighborhood, and he discussed it for their own benefit. At these functions, Kitty was Kitty and Regnan was Regnan. Joking and arguing always found their means of outlet. "Let us be serious, Kitty." She looked at him and nodded her head. "Let us pray." They knelt and prayed. He prayed aloud, and she silently. His amen seemed to be the link connecting the past and the present. So much for a beautiful human picture. Regnan, his wife, and friends were Negroes. He dealt in rags, old iron, and second-hand furniture. Kitty was a plain housewife. "I'll have a breakfast like the one we ate 25 years ago, husband." "Do, wife. I'll give Posy a good currying." "Do, husband." Kitty set about getting breakfast, and Regnan curried Posy. Kitty talked to the pancakes, and Regnan talked to Posy. "I would not burn a pancake on my husband's wedding day. Now cakes turn well." "I would not slight you, Posy, on my wife's wedding day. Now, Posy, shining Posy, see yourself." When Regnan and Kitty sat down to breakfast, Posy, hitched to the wagon, was standing with her head partly in the window. A pancake was passed to the plates of Regnan and Kitty, and one to the mouth of Posy. When breakfast was over, Regnan kissed Kitty, patted Posy, and drove off, saying, "Nordad the tinker comes ever to my mind. I wonder what today will bring. I will prepare for tonight." Regnan had a district where he bought and sold. He was regular, honest, and good-natured, and therefore popular. His rag cry was his own. It always brought trade. He ran something like this: "Rags, rags, rags, rags. Any rags, old iron? Come up, Posy, rags, old iron." This cry had brought a little fortune. As this was his anniversary, he thought he would not buy any rags, but deal in other things. A newly married man whose wife had made kindling wood of the furniture sold Regnan a cooking stove. "Beware of the first wedding day," said the man. Regnan thought himself unwise and drove on. He knew of another newly married couple who were living in hopes of many anniversaries. To these he would sell the stove. He could fancy the good wife making pancakes for her husband. Ere he could reach them, he exchanged the stove for a sofa. All good wives need a rest, said he. The sofa will therefore serve as well as the stove. I can see the good man and his wife resting upon it now. Later in the afternoon, an old friend stopped Regnan. Now listen, said he, to an anniversary march. While I play, you think of the days agone. The friend played, and the tears stole down Regnan's cheeks. How much for the fiddle? Asked Regnan. Take the fiddle for the sofa. The exchange was made. The newly married couple are loving and patient. They can wait, said Regnan. I will stop here and get my beaver hat, white vest, and swallowtail coat. He went into the tailor shop and got them. He had had them cleaned for the anniversary. Regnan was now very tired. He had been in the hot sun all day. He had had nothing to eat since morning. Besides, the malaria made him drowsy. So he stopped under a tree to rest. The clothes and fiddle were tempting. He spread the coat upon some newspapers in the wagon and put the vest in the proper place. He then placed the beaver at the head. Kitty, said he, as though she was present, look at your husband. He became more and more drowsy. He played. He nodded and closed his eyes. He stopped playing with his fingers on the bow and the bow on the strings. Several boys were watching Regnan. They thought it would be nice to put the vest, coat, and hat on the biggest boy and dance around him while Regnan played in his dreams. It was done. The boy so dressed stood in a clear place and held out the tails of the coat. The others circled around him. In every neighborhood there are at least two factions among boys. Fight is born in a boy. Letting it out occasionally will help to tame him. It was so in this case. It happened that the opposing faction had business that way. When they saw what was going on, they cried, "Fun, boys, fun!" A dozen pebbles fell among the dancers, who fled from the attack, and the fun began. The beaver hat and the swallowtail coat were kept in the lead. The opposing faction followed, threw pebbles, and laughed. Regnan awoke and began to play. "There must be fun in it," said he. "That reminds me of my young days." He looked at the wagon. The playing was cut short. He looked at the boys again. The beaver hat and swallow-tailed coat were kept in the lead. He called a spectator and paid him to take Posy and the wagon home. With fiddle in hand and thoughts on anniversary, he followed the boys. The opposing faction stopped and scattered. It was growing dark. Regnan caught one of the boys and began to scold him. "The boy with the beaver hat and swallowtail coat is the one you want. We were trying to catch him," gasped the boy. This was the truth, but it misled Regnan. The boy escaped. Regnan gained on the others. The boy followed. "Mister," said the other boys, as Regnan overtook them, "we just can't catch him. There he goes. Mister, do you care much for such old things?" As Regnan pursued his moving anniversary suit, the boys fell in behind and shouted, "Run, partner, run! The sum that's after you is an old head plus young legs. Run, partner, run!" Here the boys left their partner and Regnan to finish the race. "Stop! Thief!" cried Regnan. The boy looked back, and thinking the fiddle a club, turned and ran into a pond. They were now on the edge of the town. Regnan called to the boy to come out, and raised the fiddle involuntarily. "If you throw," said the boy, "I will dig up water in your hat." Regnan called again, and up went the fiddle. "If you throw," cried the boy, "I will lie down in the water." It was growing darker. The boy was going farther into the pond. "It is the fiddle that frightens him," said Regnan to himself. He laid it beside a tree. "See, my boy, see, my hands are empty. I will come to you." He plunged into the pond and followed the boy. "I will wait on this side. The club is over there," rejoined the boy, going all the while. In trying to increase his pace and watch at the same time, he stumbled and fell up to his neck in the water. The beaver upset and floated. Regnan caught it and pushed on. When the boy reached the bank, his wits came to him. He pulled off the coat and vest, left them, and disappeared in the darkness. Regnan embraced the hat, vest, and coat as he walked around the pond to get his fiddle. He was wet and felt a chill coming upon him. He sat down beside the fiddle. For an hour he shivered and thought of his wife, the neighbors, and the anniversary. All at once he thought of Nordad the tinker. Just then someone rode a horse up to the pond a short distance from him and let the reins fall for it to drink. "Am I to be kidnapped like Nordad the tinker?" whispered Regnan to himself. "I will crawl off." In dragging the fiddle, one of the strings was broken. The noise frightened the horse. It plunged through the pond. The rider, in trying to reach the reins, fell into the water, but quickly rose to his feet and started in pursuit of the fleeing horse. Soon both horse and rider were out of sight and hearing. Regnan breathed freely and said, "My fiddle, it may be you have saved me from being kidnapped." He then arose and started homeward. An hour later, he was on the lawn before his house. Posy, arrived home some time since, came up to him. "Posy, my girl," said he, "I wonder if your mistress is as patient as you are." "Oh, how could she be?" He then crept up to the corner of the house where he could see and hear. Everything showed that Kitty had done her duty. She was sitting in the center of some 20 women. Some were fanning her, some were crying, others were at her back, conducting a mock marriage. The men and women at the window were discussing Regnan aloud. "He should never marry me again," said one woman. "I would never let the first marriage stand," said another. "Don't be too hard on Regnan," spoke up one on the inside. "Remember, his widow is listening." "What think ye of this case?" asked a young man of an old one. "Well," answered the old man, "old Welby, who was a wiser man than Regnan, killed himself upon a similar occasion." "Gentlemen," asked the woman from within, "do you think that Kitty would look well in mourning?" The women on the outside laughed. Some of those on the inside cried aloud. Kitty buried her head in her hands. Regnan, now understanding the state of affairs, ran into the room and cried, "My Kitty!" His breeches were wet and muddy, and he had on the wet, muddy, swallow-tailed coat and vest. He held the wet, bedraggled hat in one hand and the broken fiddle in the other. At his call, Kitty made no motion, but kept her face hidden. The women formed a close circle around her. Those on the outside sneered. "My Kitty," while the men yelled, "Scat, old Tom, scat!" and "Is he drunk? Is he crazy? Is he going to kill Kitty? Help! Help! Call an officer!" These were some of the cries that came from different parts of the room. Regnan ran around the circle crying, "My Kitty! Am I drunk? Am I crazy? Am I going to kill you, Kitty?" Now 2 men seized Regnan and dragged him toward the door. Just then the preacher entered the other door, wet and muddy from head to foot. He raised his hand, and Regnan was released. Kitty, noting the hush, peeped through her fingers, first at Regnan and then at the preacher. There was a tense silence. The preacher now spoke. He told of Regnan's trouble with the fiddle, clothes, and pond. "How do you know?" asked Regnan. "It was my boy who kept the vest, coat, and beaver in the lead. Tell the adventure yourself." "Not here. I will tell it to Kitty." "What about yourself, parson?" asked Kitty. "While on my way here," said the preacher, "I stopped my horse at the pond to drink. There was a noise like the breaking of a fiddle string." "The fiddle again," interrupted Regnan, and held it up. "My horse became frightened and ran through the pond. I fell off, waded out, and have not seen the horse since." "That's true, ladies and gentlemen." "How do you know?" asked the preacher. "I was there, parson." Regnan then told of the chill, the broken string, and the accident to the rider. By this time, the people were around the edges of the room, leaving Kitty, Regnan, and the preacher in the middle. Regnan kissed his wife and said, "Are you my Kitty? Since you and the parson are so much alike in dress and story, he may answer for me." "I will, my good woman." He said a few solemn words, and the important business of the night was over. For many days the town was alive with the story of Regnan's anniversary. Thereafter, whenever Regnan wished to tell Kitty the story, he always played a march on the fiddle first. The preacher later turned his boy over to Regnan to be punished for his mischief. It was decided that he should go on the wagon with Regnan for 3 months and cry out, "Rags, old iron." The lad did so willingly. During his enforced apprenticeship, his father died, leaving him homeless, as his mother had died in his infancy, and Regnan adopted the boy, who became a valuable assistant to the old man in his business. Before the lad was of age, Regnan and Kitty both died, and left the preacher's son a snug little fortune. He kept the fiddle to remind him of the ways of Providence. The end.